The Vietnam War was a long and devastating war that shook America to its core and affected culture in ways still felt today. Many were strongly opposed to this war and questioned the true reasons behind it and why young men were being drafted and killed for its cause. It was a war broadcast regularly into homes of every American on nightly news that became increasingly apparent to be a losing war. It mystified many, leaving confusion and a struggle to really understand what was going on with the war and just what kind of an effect it had. In the years following the end of the Vietnam War, many attempts to understand it were being made, and it began being examined in pop culture as well. The late 70s through 80s, in particular, really ushered in an era of popular, critically acclaimed films dealing with the war and its repercussions. Films like The Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, Platoon, and Full Metal Jacket. Among the films in this era, many would argue that James Cameron's 1986 film, Aliens, also deserves mention. Though not a direct depiction of Vietnam, many have praised it for its use of allegory, examining the war as a science fiction horror film, looking at the behavior of the soldiers, the confusion of the battles, and the reasoning behind the war itself. James Cameron has addressed the Vietnam connection on many occasions and has provided insight into the role Vietnam played in inspiring the story of Aliens. On the 2003 audio commentary of the film, Cameron explains the reasoning behind how this squad of Marines found themselves pitted in a mysterious war and the corporate military relationships within the alien universe and how they reflect on the real world. "I'm a child of the 60s, says Cameron, and the prevailing myth at the time was that the Vietnam War was all about protecting American business interests in Southeast Asia. Of course, we wanted to have an evil corporation here. The idea is that the corporation has the contract to establish colonies, much in the sense that the Dutch East India Company might have controlled that whole area of the world, and that Colonial Marines don't work directly for them, but are called in as a security force whenever the interests of the parent country of WEYLAND YUTANI is, although it's probably a multinational given the name. I never really got into that relationship, although I think your model for that is colonial America or the Caribbean back then, where military detachments were sent as security for the major corporations who were bringing back the resources and wealth to the parent countries. It's probably some kind of very entangled relationship. I don't think the Marines report directly to the company, and you can see there is a separate chain of command when they're on a mission. They don't take orders from Burke, but Burke certainly makes very strong recommendations to them." Cameron also looked to the Vietnam era for his portrayal of the Marines seen in the film. In a 2001 interview with Randy Lafficier, Cameron stated that much of the dialogue was inspired by that era. He explains, "The sense of dramatic relationships from these 1940s, 1950s war films which sort of portrayed the common soldier was more what I was looking for. The dialogue itself, the idiom, is pretty much Vietnam era. It's the most contemporary American combat war speak that I had access to. I studied how soldiers talked in Vietnam, and I took certain specific bits of terminology and a general sense of how they express themselves, and I used that for the dialogue, to try to make it seem like a realistic sort of military expedition, as opposed to a high-tech, futuristic one. I wanted to create more of a sense of realism rather than that of an interesting future." The portrayal of Cameron's soldiers is also elaborated on with James Cameron's audio commentary track for the film. He used Vietnam-era attitude and aesthetic for the Colonial Marines, though he admits his portrayal of Marines was somewhat liberal. "I knew nothing about the U.S. Marine Corps at the time," Cameron explained, though curiously, while I was making the film, my youngest brother joined the Marines and was in for 6 years. I now know an awful lot more about the Marines, and they are much more disciplined than these people. I would like to apologize to any Marines who might be listening that we did not get that part of it right. These guys are definitely Vietnam-era, regular army, toward the end of their tour kind of motif. The film is obviously informed by a lot of the imagery from Vietnam, the idea that they'd paint flowers on their helmets and things like that, and there was a real discipline problem. Of course, that was also amongst a lot of draftees at that time, so we're kind of mixing our metaphors a little bit here. In addition to James Cameron's soldiers, their technology was also meant to evoke imagery of the Vietnam era. In the documentary Superior Firepower, The Making of Aliens, designer Ron Cobb reflects on his work with Cameron and the depiction of Vietnam-era-like technology. He explains, "The national psyche was still full of Vietnam, so I think that because Jim was going to do it all with colonial police, that there should be some kind of subliminal Vietnam look. Certainly the dropship, because it's purposefully meant to look a little like a Phantom jet and a little bit like a Healy helicopter. That was all touched on by Jim and myself. This, of course, all amounts to the strongest allegorical element of all. The superior firepower of the soldiers falls to the less technologically advanced but unwavering enemy. Cameron also sheds light on this comparison in his commentary track. One of the themes of the film is that these technologically advanced soldiers succumb to a technologically inferior but much more determined enemy that they don't know how to fight, which is really kind of a Vietnam metaphor where basically US forces got their butts kicked by barefoot guys running through the jungle, because they didn't understand how to fight that war. They didn't understand their enemy or the determination of that enemy. Cameron also points out Hudson's scene before the drop, where he touts himself and his fellow Marines as a squad of ultimate badasses, showing off all their weaponry to Ripley with all the confidence in the world. Cameron adds, Hudson's bragging scene kind of plays into that. They're too cocky. They think they can handle anything because they got the firepower. Aliens also studies post-war trauma and depicts our heroine, Ripley, as someone struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder after her horrific experience on the Nostromo. Also from his L'Officier interview, Cameron argues that Ripley's decision to join the mission is purely a psychological one. I think some people miss the point, Cameron notes. They think she goes because she'll get her job back, but that's not the case. There's no amount of money that could do it. One of my biggest problems writing the film was coming up with a reason why she goes back. It had to be psychological. One of the things that interested me is that there are a lot of soldiers from Vietnam who have been in intense combat situations who re-enlisted to go back again, because they had these psychological problems that they had to work out. It's like an inner demon to be exorcised. That was a good metaphor for her character. While not directly a Vietnam War film, Aliens definitely carries a lot of elements of one. Part of the reasons why Aliens is such a great film is that it is an incredibly detailed world created here, and has the authenticity that I think warrants such metaphors to be used and such an allegory to be played out within the story. It captures the mood and spirit of just about any of the great Vietnam War movies. Do you think Aliens should be classified as a Vietnam War movie? What movies do you think best depict the Vietnam War? Comment below and share your thoughts. As always, thank you very much for watching, I really appreciate it, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like, and you can also subscribe for all the latest videos from the channel. A very special thanks goes out to our WEYLAND YUTANI executive, EmYarUk, part of the Patreon Hive. I'd also like to thank our Hive's queen, Lady Anne. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for exclusive posts and contests. In the meantime, you can catch up with Alien Theory over social media. Follow @alien_theory on Twitter and @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.